Hello, and welcome to the podcast of the Euramerican National Assembly. I'm Mr. R, and I have Don and Mr. Ed with me as well today. This is going to be a special lightning round podcast. We're going to make it pretty quick. We have our monthly movie night coming up, and we failed at the previous version of this recording. So this is our take two, and we're just going to jump right into it. So today we're talking about a document that Mr. Ed put out, which we're kind of discussing, talking through, thinking out loud about. It's called the Enclave Strategy for Euramericans, and it's really a bigger strategy document about what we're trying to accomplish. It tries to be realistic about what our current situation is, the situation we find ourselves in, and what's the causes for that, and what's a reasonable strategy to move forward from here to both improve our lives in the short term and also longer term, make things possible for larger change as well. So without further delay, I will just throw it over to Mr. Ed.
So in my professional life, we have this thing called ISO 9000, which the doctrine or the teaching is you should say what you're doing and then you should do what you're saying. Say what you're doing means document everything that you think you should be doing, and then do what you say means follow what you just said you were going to do and do it. So kind of applying that strategy to what we're doing as an organization, as a movement, I kind of wanted to be able to say, what is it that we're doing? Let's and present that to other people in this room and in the discussion and in the organization, and say, do you agree that this is what we're working on doing, and accept criticism or change. And then once we are all in agreement, we kind of know what we're doing. And so what I'm proposing is what's called the Enclave Strategy for Euramericans. Let me start with a real quick definition of what an enclave is. So Merriam-Webster's has a pretty good definition. It says that an enclave is a distinct territorial, cultural, or social unit enclosed within or as if within foreign territory. Wikipedia defines it as a geographic area with high ethnic concentration, characteristic cultural identity, and economic activity. I think that's a pretty good definition. Finally, Oxford Reference Dictionary defines an ethnic enclave as a neighborhood or larger territory whose population is largely ethnically distinguished from the surrounding area and its inhabitants. So the Euramerican enclave strategy is an attempt to formalize an enclave strategy for what we're doing. And what that means is that we recognize that we are in an ocean surrounded by other ethnic groups. We are part of some larger system, like in particular an empire, which is trying to grow itself despite our wishes to be our own national ethnic entity and to sustain and promote our own view of society, who we are, what we're doing, and what a good society is, and to formalize that and say, this is what we're doing then, right? So in this strategy document, it's in two sections. The first section is situation and criticism, which is kind of saying this is where we are, and then the second section is the enclave strategy. I'm going to go through quickly on the situation and criticism. So the first one is the situation. We find ourselves in an imperial state which was once our own ethno-national state. So the point is, here we are today. We got to look around. Where are we? What's going on? We've got to use that to orient ourselves, to define what it is that we're doing and how we're moving forward. But we also have to recognize that, yes, we're in this grand empire, global homo empire, whatever you want to call it. I would argue, and I could support specifically with Diana West's writings, that the U.S. government was invaded, infiltrated, and subverted before World War II by Marxists and globalists. And yet, this huge, strong empire is is one of the world's strongest empires. The United States empire has a military 10 times more powerful than, several of the next countries down in the list of military strength. It has tremendous reach, economic resources. It has the ability to utilize mass communication in a way that has never existed in history in the past. It basically has unlimited resources, and it has the strongest surveillance and anti-insurgency apparatus that anything has ever had. So I think from that realization of our situation, we have to basically, whether we like it or not, a revolutionary struggle is not viable in that kind of an environment. You can't even communicate between 2 or 3 people without that communications being intercepted and utilized by the state security forces. So we have to pick a strategy that's going to work in the conditions in which we live, and no cookie cutter, monkey see, monkey do kind of simplistic revolutionary theory is going to allow us to change the world the way that we want it to become. So the next step in this situations and criticism is criticisms of our predecessors. And I'm not being totally negative on them. I'm just trying to be realistic. For whatever cause, whatever reason, the people who've come before us that were seeking to save our society, they weren't effective. It's just a fact. And I think I kind of understand why, in a larger historical kind of sense. They thought that this was their country, that its institutions represented them. And so they in many cases in the past, they only saw the need for a reform movement or a revanchist, a defensive kind of movement to keep the communists out without realizing they'd already taken over. And in many cases, the only problem they thought they saw was that they weren't the ones who were in control of this empire. And because of that, ultimately all of the institutions have been co-opted by anti-white Marxist forces, whatever you want to call them. Even though it was a stated strategy of, Leninists, of neo-Marxists, to have their so-called long march through the institutions, and they set about doing it, nothing stood in their way. There was nobody who apparently understood how to fight that. And in many cases, even though they were totally corrupted institutions, the people who were fighting against these changes which we're opposed to today, they justified and legitimized the very institutions which were working against them. And so, whether you like it or not, there are few to no real groundwork or parallel institutions that represent our people today. We are almost defenseless in terms of having, media, schools, any other major institutions to support and defend our people. All of again, media, education, all cultural institutions are either controlled by the federal government or have been infiltrated. Teachers' unions, for example, are infiltrated by Marxists. IEBC, the International Electrical Brotherhood, or is it IEBW, I think it is. A number of these large, union-type organizations, that's been an explicit strategy. So here we are. This is the reality. We're in the world's most powerful empire, and we want something different than what it has envisioned for us. Its vision is to dissolve us and bring in millions of foreign peoples, and we're just going to be, some faceless, nameless, resultant population that's underlying all of these other foreign peoples that they've piled on top of us. It's not acceptable. There are a lot of people who want to claim or try to call for so-called revolutionary change, that we can do it, we can organize, but when you're confronted by the world's most powerful security apparatus, surveillance apparatus, powerful military with almost unlimited resources, it's just not likely to happen. So what I said, or the condition or conclusion I came to based on that, though, there is a glimmer of hope. And that hope is that empires are not forever. Empires can also lose power and effectiveness over time. Just generally, empires grow by in two approaches. One, they either grow territorially, externally, and bring in more ethnic nationalities under their umbrella, or they grow internally, which is they take these people who are outside and they drop them inside. And we have to accept that the elites, the people who are in control of this system, they don't care about us anymore. So we have to stop giving them authority to decide our future for us. But because of this approach of bringing multiple ethnic groups and multiple different interest groups together under one umbrella, that can be a fairly fragile system at times. So again, the empire is not going to survive forever, and in many ways, every ethnic group throughout history has had to face with its survival against an empire. The empires come and go, and people either get eaten up by those empires, or they live through those empires and survive and outlive those empires. So with that realization, we just have to come to some conclusion about how we're going to survive and thrive given the conditions that we find ourselves. The ENA is advocating for a protracted struggle for our national survival. We can see that the U.S. empire is likely in its decay phase. It'll probably enter its termination phase at some point, who knows when. But we have to outlive the empire. Our nation, our people, the Euramerican nation, has to survive, thrive, and eventually outlive this empire. And that's what we're advocating, and that's what the Enclave strategy is advocating for.
So before we talk about the Enclave strategy itself, I think maybe we can kind of give some feedback, some commentary on the situation we find ourselves in. I think that was a good summary of where we are, that we don't have an existing community, right? I mean, it's even hard just to find other people that have the views that we have. It should be fairly straightforward to, there should be a cultural center or something. None of that exists. There is no straightforward, obvious way to find people that are pro-white or pro-Euramerican or have a positive ethnic sense who are white. So we're in a bad spot. A lot of the foundations that would allow for significant political change are not there. And I think that maybe at some point in the past it was more reasonable to have those assumptions because you could just say, oh, well, we have all these people that believe similar things to us. But that's just not true anymore. And whether it was true back then, I would say is somewhat debatable. But being realistic about the situation, I don't see a way to. I've seen some people fantasize about taking down the empire. It's a bizarre fantasy because they have nothing. They're starting with no political base. They have no economic base. You could be just annihilated from the entire world, basically without them even firing a shot. They can get rid of you by getting you canceled from your job, getting you kicked off of social media, so you can't speak and you can't make any money. You're irrelevant. So people need to understand the situation that we're in, and I think that it's a good to start with that understanding.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people that have revolutionary fantasies, and I just don't see it as being realistic. And moreover, I would point out, if you even study, guerrilla warfare, irregular warfare, unconventional warfare, special operations, whatever you want to call it, there always has to be a general population which is supportive of that cause, and then some underground group that's doing it. And so there has to be a larger community to support, some fighting force. And I'm not saying that's what we are, but if anybody is going to be promoting a revolutionary strategy, they should be at least working to build a community that's, above ground legal that supports it. So anyways, if it's okay with you, should we move on to the Enclave strategy?
Yep, let's go.
So the name of it, to give it a name, is the Euramerican Enclave strategy. The goal or mission is the development of a completely self-sustaining, positive, pro-Euramerican community dedicated to its own self-determination and freedom. And I think what's not included in there, but which comes a little bit later, is through legal means, through entirely legal means. We have to accept it. Whatever the conditions we find ourselves in now, no one's going to come and save us. We have to accept responsibility for where we are now and where we're going. Nobody's going to shed a tear if the pasty white people of the world disappear and get subsumed under a brown masses. Nobody cares. The only people who care and who can fix that problem is us, and we have to do it. So the first step is we have to accept that we have to survive as a people. On the one hand, that means we are a people, and two, we have to engage in activities to survive and thrive. And so the Euramerican Enclave strategy calls for the development of a parallel society within a society, and means four things. We have to have our own institutions, our own infrastructure, our own culture, and our own authorities. Those are the things that build a society. All societies have those things, and so all we have to do is have those for our own. And that's not to say it's easy to do. So what we have to do in order to survive is we have to organize ourselves to defend, practice, and promote our culture. First step is we have to say, this is who we are, this is what we want, and this is how we want to live as a people. And this is who we're not. We don't accept that. But this is who we are. And then we have to create organizations which support our community, our new society. And we have to organize the institutions that we need to develop to sustain. So those are there's a whole list of them. I've got a really big long list of them here, but I'm just going to touch on them real quickly. Cultural institutions, economic institutions, media, things like that. And one way to think about where to start in the kinds of institutions, there's these things called enculturing institutions. And enculturing institutions are the things that communicate culture to the members of a community, of a society. And schools are one of those kinds of things, but also media, for example, news and entertainment. These are institutions that communicate the people's unique approach of viewpoints and values. And we cannot rely on our opposition to control those things for us. Other institutions we have to be able to have are, things like community institutions, community associations, local community groups, getting together regularly for picnics like what we do is one example. And of course, the Euramerican National Assembly is one of those institutions which is focused on bringing about this overall strategy. So we can work within this approach to bring about the change and the situation, the conditions that we want. Other key things are businesses, simple things like stores, bars, restaurants, books and music stores, and then also technology that's been adapted to our case. We can't, for example, rebuild a whole new internet, but we can take the existing internet and use it for our own purposes. So institutions is one of the things I mentioned. Infrastructure is itself something else. So institutions are social organizations that exist to bring about certain functions in a society. Infrastructure are hardware or physical means needed, money, for example, and other things. But so again, we can't rebuild a whole new internet, but we can do things like have VPNs and overlay networks that utilize the existing network structure to meet our own needs. That means we can have our own social media, secure communications, video production and distribution. All of this can duplicate everything that people come to expect from an advanced modern society, but focused on the Euro-American community. In general, moving on to kind of the other thing, so on the one hand, we have to accept that we're a people. We have to engage in activity to build institutions, infrastructure. But then the most important thing we have to do is legitimize our cause to ourselves and others. Talk about our human rights, our natural rights, our ethnic rights. a lot of people don't realize that historically it's been recognized that nations have the right to exist. And by saying we're a nation, we incur all of the rights that go with being a nation. And in fact, that's what our opposition is trying to do, is try to erase that idea from people's minds at all, that we are a different people, that we have a different destiny. So other than those other top-level activities, which include legitimizing our cause, we also have to delegitimize and interfere with our opposition. Globalists, imperialists, anti-nationalist groups are all trying to operate in this space and mold us for their own agendas. And we have to, we have to, one, understand what they're trying to do, and then two, interfere with that occurring so that they don't make advances at our expense. And then, again, with the bigger picture that, empires aren't forever, that empires do weaken and eventually fall, we have to be ready to take advantage of opportunities that arise. But in order to do any of this, we have to be very organized, we have to be very skillful, very knowledgeable, and we have to develop the institutions and infrastructure that are needed. And then one caution, which is generally not often considered, both security forces and Marxist groups, by their very approach, utilize infiltration and subversion and distraction to keep groups, national groups, from becoming effective and establishing and growing. So we have to understand that we would be under attack, not even in a physical way, but in an ideological way, and we just have to be sophisticated enough to understand what our opposition is doing and how to counter, for whatever you want to call it, psychological operations. Just, the definition of psychological operations is to reduce a group's ability to think of itself as succeeding or winning. So often that's what they'll try to do, is say, this is a losing cause. You can't succeed, and we have to reject that. We know that if we follow a proper process, we can get the results that we want. And then, so that's kind of the broad, big picture, but of the Euramerican Enclave strategy. But one thing I want to stress is that this is not an illegal approach. We're going to do it all within the laws and confines of the system in which we operate, which does not mean that we will not push back, because many of the laws that have been put in place in the past 50 or more years are unjust and hostile and against our rights. So we can push back to see our rights recognized and to see justice prevail. But for the most part, and in every way possible, we're going to try to follow the laws of the land, and in fact change those laws to our own advantage. So that's kind of the big picture.
That was good, and thank you for doing the very quick overview this time. We're not going to have as much time for discussion as we did on our first run through, but a few comments I want to make real quick are that so it being a legal strategy and it being a documented legal strategy, that we say what we're going to do and then we do what we said we're going to do. I think that that's critical. That is an important piece of preventing infiltration and subversion, because we know what we're about. Someone can't come in and say, "Oh, you're actually about this other thing," and mislead us and take leadership role and lead us in a different direction, because it's documented what the whole point of our organization is and what our goals are. We're open about it. We don't need to be. We're not trying to be secretive about our goals or our methods here. Our methods are to create a enclave, and the enclave also. And one thing I want to note is it doesn't necessarily have to have a geographical location. An enclave can exist kind of spread out within a city or spread out within a country. It's the connections in between them that makes it an enclave. And this strategy, no matter what you think about the long-term prospects for the United States or other Euro-American countries, if you're in Canada, whatever you think for your prospects, in the short term, this strategy is going to improve our lives. We need this strategy in order to build up a community that can support itself, that isn't under the thumb as much as the current as our current situation is. Right now, like I said, it's so easy for someone to just get squashed by the system, by simply the soft power of the system. They don't even need to unleash their hard power. And we can counter that by having our own institutions, having our own economy, having our own internal sort of authority, so that it's harder for them to squish people that are causing them problems. So even if you think to yourself, oh, long term, we're going to need some sort of out there revolutionary approach, you should still be supporting this type of community building, because you need that community for whatever you're going to do. And for us, we want that community because it's going to improve our lives and the lives of our families and our future. And that's all it needs. I think that a lot of us believe that the American empire is going to collapse at some point, or at least retract. And maybe there'll be an opportunity to have things change in a larger way at that time. But in the meantime, I would like to have as much independence as possible, and I think that that's what this strategy attempts to do.
Well, and another thing is, it's good to plan a strategy for both success and failure. If we are successful, well, then great. Our strategy led us. But if for whatever reason we're unsuccessful, we don't want our people to cease to exist. And this kind of an approach is an approach that virtually every ethnic group throughout the world in history has utilized to survive within an empire, through an empire, against other hostile ethnic national groups. If you look around, there's little Chinas, there's little Koreas, there's little Japans, little Vietnams around the country. I just went to Idaho, and there were little Mexicos up there. And much the same way, we're going to create little Euramerican enclaves wherever we are. We're going to try to link up those enclaves through services, maybe media services, communication services across those, so that we can survive the mess. And at least, even if we're a dispersed people, we can at some time decide to come together if we still survive as a people. So I'm trying to generally pick a strategy that is, that succeeds even when things don't go the way you want them to go.
Well, I think that's pretty good. I think that we're out of time. We're going to have people showing up for movie night pretty soon, and I think that we did a good job of fitting it all in very quickly on the second run through. So sorry for the shorter podcast this month, but I think that's probably all we have time for today.
And my intention is to, once we're in agreement over the terms of this strategy, is to document it in a publication that I'll make available to everyone in this group, and then on our website, www.euramerican.org.
And we'll also link our Telegram announcements channel on the various places where we post this. That's where some of these discussions kind of happen that lead towards a document like this. So thank you all for listening, and we'll talk to you in a month.